Call this meeting of the work session for the Salem City Council and Planning Commission on our Salem to order. Just a couple of things, just so you know, you're on television this evening, so you'll want to kind of pay attention to that. The other is these microphones, if you get about 6-7 inches away and speak directly into them, the people watching you can hear you under that circumstance. If you don't, they can't hear you. So if you would, we'll keep the mics moving around to make it easy for everybody. So we'll go ahead and dispense with a roll call. Just introduce ourselves for the record, please. I'm Chuck Bennett, Mayor of Salem.
Which way are you headed?
We're going to head this way.
Norman Wright, Community Development Director for the City of Salem.
Brad Nanke, Salem City Councilor, Ward 3.
Josh Pollux, Planning Commission.
Sally Cook, City Councilor, Ward 7.
Ian Levin, Salem Planning Commission.
Chris Hoy, City Councilor, Ward 6.
Shane Griggs, President, Planning Commission.
Ashley Schweigart, Planning Commission.
Jackie Leung, Councilor, Ward 4.
Tom Anderson, Councilor, Ward 2.
Casey Copcho, Planning Commission.
And I'm Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director, and tonight sitting in for Steve Powers, who is out of town.
Okay, if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know, just.
We'll pledge you to the east.
That's right, that's right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I don't see any additions or deletions to the agenda. I am going to, though, let you know that we will be adding public comment after our discussion to allow folks an opportunity. If they have comment, we'll be limiting time to about, right now, 3 minutes. But if a lot of people come up, it could hit 2, depending on how much time we take just going over the program this evening. But I want to make sure the public has an opportunity to comment. Okay, so who's in charge here?
Well, that's Eunice, but I am going to start. Hi, my name is Lisa Anderson-Ogilvie. I'm your planning administrator. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to this joint work session. So just a reminder of where we're at. We kicked off phase 1 of our Salem about 9 months ago, and we concluded that in May, and we presented the results of phase 1 and the greenhouse gas inventory to the council and to the planning commission separately. And at that time, the council asked to have a work session on phase 2 and how we're going to handle outreach. So that's what Eunice is going to present to you tonight. But we just wanted to give a reminder of where we're at. And thank you all for coming. And when we get to public comment, just FYI, we don't have a handheld mic, so we'll just ask people to come up here and use this microphone. And I'm going to turn it over to Eunice.
So again, I'm Eunice Kim, planner with the Community Development Department for the City of Salem. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm here tonight to give an update on the Our Salem Project. I'm going to start with just kind of a broad overview of what the project is, so we're all kind of on the same page, and then give a quick recap of what we did in phase 1. The bulk of the presentation, though, is going to really be about the visioning phase that we're in now. So what is Our Salem? Our Salem is a multi-year project to update our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan really is our long-range plan for how we will grow and develop over the next 20 years. It guides everything from what type of housing is allowed and where it's allowed, to how our transportation system is designed, to how we protect our natural environments. So it has goals and policies and a map that kind of drive that decision-making process. Our comprehensive plan was first adopted in 1973. We haven't done a holistic update in decades. So this project really is a result of the strategic planning process that occurred in 2017. As I'm sure you all remember, that strategic planning process really went out to the public and asked, what are your priorities for the city? It drives our strategic plan, our council policy agenda, our budget. And one of the things that came out of that process was really a desire from the community to better understand how are we going to grow and develop, what is our vision for the future. So as a result of that, City Council, you all approved a budget to update our comprehensive plan back in 2017. So just as a reminder, our comprehensive plan, it applies to not just city limits, which is the dashed black line on the map, but also the areas outside of the city limits that's still inside our portion of the urban growth boundary. We share that boundary, the urban growth boundary, with Kaiser, but Kaiser is not included as part of this comprehensive plan update in terms of our goals, our policies, and our map. It's this gray area that we anticipate seeing 60,000 more people by 2035. So we're really trying to plan for how we should accommodate that growth. So comprehensive plan has a lot of parts. It includes our policies and our goals and our map like I talked about, but it also includes our transportation system plan, our parks master plan, and other components. But when we talk about updating the comprehensive plan, we're talking about the policies plans, that's the goals and policies that really drive future growth and development, and then the comprehensive plan map. That's not to say that the transportation system plan and the parks master plan won't be updated, but they will be updated to implement this bigger vision in the policies plan. So the first step is really this update to the big policies plan and the map, and then we'll do updates to like the zoning code, the transportation plan, and everything so that it's all consistent. So this is a big project, so we divided it up into phases. The first phase, like Lisa said, kicked off last fall. It really focused on our existing conditions, what do we look like today, and how do we think we're going to grow? And then this phase that we're in now is really the visioning. But I wanted to kind of start with a recap again of that first phase so we know where we've been and what we've learned so far. So the first phase looked at what does Salem look like today. We looked at like how affordable is our housing, how safe is our community, what kind of jobs are we providing. And it then projected out to 2035, what do we think we would look like if we didn't change any goals, we didn't change policies, our zoning regulations, everything kind of stayed the same, what would we look like? And we looked at two scenarios, and these are some examples of the maps that where the new households would be. The first scenario is called current trends. That's kind of our business as usual. We're still building and developing like we've been building in the past. And the dark areas on the map are where the new households would be concentrated in the future if we've been growing, if we keep growing as we've been growing essentially. So the darker areas really reflect where our vacant land is and our partially vacant land is. The zoning build out is if population just kind of burst and went crazy and we had like 93,000 more people, if the market really picked up, where would we see development? It's generally the same areas where we have our vacant and partially vacant land, but also it just shows a lot of redevelopment. So those are kind of the two scenarios we looked at in the first phase. And again, all of this would be possible without this visioning, just with our current regulations, our current plans, our current goals. So in the first phase, we went out to the public and asked them, how do you want to measure Salem today and as we grow? We really wanted to understand what are your priorities, how should we evaluate the city and our future growth. We worked with a consultant team that had over 80 or 90 what we're calling indicators for what we could measure in terms of our growth. We had an advisory committee that weighed in, we did a survey, and through all of that input, we came up with essentially 20 what we're calling indicators. And those indicators are really grouped in these 6 result areas that align with the same result areas we use in our strategic plan, our policy agenda, and our budget. They range everything from how livable we are, so like how complete are our neighborhoods, how affordable is our housing, to what is our impact on the environment in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, everything from our jobs to our economy. So these are the 20 indicators that we looked at when we were looking at those two scenarios, those two maps of how we could grow in the future if we didn't really change any goals and policies. And this was really our result. The report card, which hopefully you all have seen, I have some copies if you haven't seen it. And this is a result. So the green areas are essentially where we think we're heading in the right direction based on some of our adopted goals and policies currently. Our yellow is where we're not sure if we're going in the right direction or not. And then the red areas are where we think we're headed in the wrong direction. A lot of the indicators are yellow because we don't have a lot of adopted goals and targets in our current comprehensive plan. And we just haven't done the community-wide visioning to really understand where the community wants to grow, how it wants to grow. So that's where our current phase comes in. So now we're in the visioning phase, and this is where we really get to ask the public, How do you want to grow and develop? What are your priorities? What do you want to keep? What are there things you want to preserve, or what do you want to change and improve? It's really kind of wide open and asking the community, what does your ideal future Salem look like? So we anticipate this visioning phase lasting about a year with 3 major milestones. The first milestone will be this fall, and that's kind of the big open picture of what kind of land uses do you want to see where, what kind of transportation facilities do you want to see where, what are your priorities, and folks will be able to come to workshops and essentially use game pieces. So this is just an example of what our game pieces could look like, but each game piece would essentially represent a different type of land use or development type. They'd be associated, for example, with industrial land and the number of jobs and the number of housing units associated with that game piece. So literally people will be able to kind of map out on an aerial, what do you want to change, where do you want to see different uses. They'll be able to draw on the maps to show this is where I want to see trails, this is where I want to see different infrastructure, and kind of big open slate, what do you want to see. We will be doing this kind of exercise at 3 different workshops in August 16th, 17th, and the 25th. October, thank you. October. So October 16th, I'm operating. Anyway, 16th and 17th, and the 25th. The 25th is going to be in Spanish, and we're going to hold that one at Chemeketa. We're going to see if that's something that's new that we haven't done in the past, so we're going to see if that's successful in terms of outreach. And then the other 2, again, are the 16th and the 17th. The content will be generally the same, so we're not asking people to come to all 3. It's really just to have options. If you can't make one date, you can come to another, etc. The second major milestone is the scenarios. So we will be taking all of the input from those visioning workshops and other outreach that we'll be doing and really figuring out, given all that input, where do we want to see Salem going? We anticipate having 4 scenarios. Those scenarios could, for example, focus on different areas of agreement. So say there's an area of town, generally people want to see mixed use there, or generally there's agreement, people want to see industrial, or generally just what are the different options we have for the future. And we'll show those scenarios at, again, workshops in the spring, probably the early spring. And then we will say, okay, given those scenarios, what are the differences between them and how do they perform? So going back to those indicators from the first phase, we will then evaluate those 4 future scenarios. This is really an opportunity to compare them to say, in this scenario, we do really great when it comes to complete neighborhoods and the environment, but really poorly when it has to do with jobs, for example. We'll also be able to compare to kind of the first phase of work that we did. So maybe hopefully some of those yellows turn to green, maybe some of those reds turn to green, and really try to understand, are we getting better? Are we getting closer to the ideal Salem that folks envision? So it's an opportunity to do some evaluation. And then we'll take all of that and get input, obviously, from the community, and then come back in the fall of next year with visioning, our community vision. This is essentially going to be, this is what we think the vision should be. Did we get it right? What kind of tweaks do you want to make? We'll talk about implementation. What are the goals and policies that we'll need to put in place to implement this vision? It's really an opportunity to see the map, essentially. This vision will translate into the comprehensive plan map that we'll be updating. So we're not just doing workshops. We will be doing multiple workshops kind of at all of those 3 milestones. But we understand from all of our outreach in the past that not everyone comes to a night meeting, not everyone comes to a meeting at all. So we'll be doing, online components to go with each of the workshops. We'll be going out and about to different organizations to present similar ideas or similar kind of questions, and then getting feedback from those groups. So you'll see a lot of us over the next year. We have started our outreach already. Since about mid-July, we've been spending time out and about at community events. We've really learned from our neighborhood planning process that you need to go where the people are. So we've been going to the Family Fest, the Forest Festival, the farmers markets, and we've been bringing these boards with us. One of the boards, really with the map, asks people, where do you live? If you can pin yourself on this map, where do you live? That really gives people an opportunity to kind of start thinking, where's my neighborhood? Where am I on a map? And then we ask the questions, how do you wish essentially your neighborhood would be improved? What are your goals for the neighborhood? And then what are your goals for the city? The idea of the first question focused on neighborhoods is really to understand, what is your ideal for your neighborhood? What is a complete neighborhood to you? What do you wish you could walk to? What do you wish you could do? And that will help us kind of understand at the neighborhood level what people's priorities are. And then the citywide question is again for priorities that will drive our goals and our policies for the city. So it's really just getting people to start thinking in these terms of their neighborhood and the city. And we're just also just introducing, honestly, the project to a lot of people who maybe haven't been involved in the first phase of the project. We're also spending a lot of time connecting to different organizations in the city. As you all know, there are a lot of organizations in the community, a lot of organizations that haven't necessarily been engaged in planning in the past. So we've been spending time connecting to leaders of those organizations to understand both how to best engage those communities, the people they serve, their clients, or even the organizations themselves, and also just, again, introducing the project and talking through what this process is all about. People have been really gracious with meeting with me and spending time understanding the project, so we anticipate doing that throughout the project. There are still a lot of other people we need to engage. We will be talking to the neighborhood associations, the realtors, the chamber, and other organizations. And so I will be at those meetings of those groups, kind of giving the same presentation and getting their feedback. And then better understanding again, is there anything else I should be doing to reach those people? So after we have the vision at the fall, there is still some work to do in terms of actually writing the goals and the policies in the comp plan, and then making sure we have that map for the comprehensive plan map ready. So that would probably take another year. So our plan is then through the fall of 2021, hopefully getting to the place where we can start an adoption process. And I should say that the comprehensive plan update will also have an implementation plan. What are those steps we need to take to actually make sure this vision is implemented, is actually carried out? So we're working with a consultant team who will help us with that implementation plan as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Very good. Any questions for Eunice? Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I had a few questions.
Yeah,
The first
great.
one that you had were the visioning workshops in October.
Yes.
Are those also the information that you're handing out there? Are those also the ones that you're doing the outreach events at, or are those two separate?
That's a good question. Yeah. So between basically now and those workshops, we're kind of asking these broader questions about what do you want for your neighborhood, what do you want for the city. Once we get to the workshops, it'll be a little bit more in depth. It'll be more of the kind of what do you want to see where, more specifically, where do you want to see trails, where do you want to see different uses. And we'll bring that type of exercise to the smaller groups as well.
Okay, to follow up on that then,
Yeah.
especially for those visioning workshops,
Yeah.
do you have a location for the one on the 16th and 17th
Yes,
yet?
yes, I have a handout. I hopefully I gave it out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're gonna have one closer to downtown and one in South Salem, and then one at Chebecca.
And is there a reason why it's just being offered in English and Spanish versus some of the other languages for some of the other communities that may want to be involved with this, but then because English might be a barrier for them?
Yeah, we could see if we could do smaller versions of these workshops in other languages. We focused on English and Spanish. We know there's a large Spanish-speaking population here, but yeah, that's something we could consider.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh.
Just a minute. Go ahead.
I'm under the assumption this is just the time for questions and we can have a discussion later. So my first question is, how do we get to 210,000 in the population? Maybe you explained that and I missed it because,
Yeah.
the census says we're 170, so is it the urban growth
Yes.
boundary?
Yes, it's our portion of the urban growth boundary, so it includes those unincorporated areas of the counties.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I can continue, I'm looking at page 11 of the, it's the continued growth under new policies, new households,
Mhm.
that one.
Mhm.
The zoning build-out only involves the increased population with the zoning and other factors remaining the same?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's the one. So does this, I think at some point we ought to look at the new law about no single-family zoning and the duplexes and quads and everything else that can be along. So will we get something that anticipates the current changes in the law and how that might affect things?
Yeah, going forward, we can incorporate that into the model.
Okay.
Yep.
Because when I look at it, that I thought maybe it was incorporated, because I see the zoning build out in the core part of the city that isn't there before, and maybe that's just naturally would do it, but that's also would be someplace where you might be more likely to see the change in single-family zoning. 4 scenarios. Do you have the 4 scenarios in mind, or you just pick out 4 based on what happened?
Yeah, we're just anticipating at least having 4 options from all the different input we get.
And then I actually have no idea about what this, if you go forward to the
sorry.
scenarios, what does that mean? Or is that just,
That's just showing like this is what today looks like.
okay.
You could grow in different ways as
Okay,
opposed to
so
one
it's just
straight
an
line.
illustrative stuff
Yes.
that doesn't really relate
Yes.
right now to
Yes.
reality on the ground.
Yes.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Then one last one, Mr. Mayor. Connect organizations.
Connect
3 that I didn't see there, and I'm not saying that they need to be there, but at least I'm hoping you could consider school district. Then I'm thinking specifically of African American churches. That'd be a good community area. And then I'm also wondering if that should or could be enlarged to all churches or houses of worship.
Yeah. We've started to reach out to the faith communities.
Okay, did you say that someplace?
I don't think I said it. I didn't.
Okay, good. Then there you go. So I should read more carefully.
Oh, that's okay. We are reaching out through the schools, and we do have a technical advisory committee with the school district on it.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank
Yeah.
you, Eunice.
Yep.
Yeah, Jane.
During those outreach opportunities, will we ask the citizens not only for their input, but priorities for their input so that we have a better idea of what's most important? Because I don't think there'll be a situation where they'll get everything.
Everything turns green.
I just don't think that's how the budget works. But it would be interested to also have that input
right.
to know where their priorities are.
Yeah, I think that will also help us understand of the 4 scenarios. There's going to be trade-offs, obviously, like which one are we leaning towards, or is it a mesh of them, et cetera. Yeah, agreed.
Josh?
So I'm thinking of the across the bridge connection to organization like the West Salem Business Association would be great. And
Yep.
then also I know Polk County is the county, but you know there might be they might actually be somebody they might want to connect to issues, you know, that they might want to see there, and then also, you know, piggyback on or partner with or things like that. So would you be at least giving them this information or just presenting to them, or how would that work?
So I am meeting with is it a chair president of the West Salem Business Association, I think next week.
Okay, great.
So I've reached out to them. Polk County is on our advisory committee.
Okay.
If there are organizations in Polk County you think we should reach out to, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, but just so that the other side has a voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Yep.
Anyone else have any questions? I got some comments. No, why don't we then go to comments, or if you have ideas you want to share, is that correct,
Yeah,
under
sure.
the visioning process? Tom?
I was waiting to see if someone else had any comments, and
I
I'm
will
sure they
let
will.
you start.
I'm looking at the phase 1 results on page 11 of our material, and Eunice, I hope you could bring that up on the screen, please.
Yep.
The green, yellow, and red boxes.
It's the phase 1. Yeah, that's it. I look at these and I see, to me, all of the red ones: walk transit, bicycle ped, greenhouse gas, air pollution from travel, and to not as great extent to tree canopy. All those seem to me to relate to the greenhouse gas inventory and the environmental action plan we're talking to. And it's a little disturbing that of the all the ones that we are going in the wrong direction relate to that particular thing. And I notice, and I don't think it's here, but 53% of our greenhouse gas emissions are from cars. 26% is from electric generation, and I assume that is static buildings that are generating electricity. Is that right? Yeah. Okay, and then 16% is from stationary combustion, and I have no idea what that is.
That's natural gas, like cooking.
Okay,
heating.
okay. So it sure seems to me that we ought to focus some more effort on turning those red at least into yellow and hopefully into green. So that's where I'd be interested in looking at some sort of visionary process and recommendations that come out of the end of the vision process.
So you're essentially saying you'd like to kind of package up the red into a kind of a, really it's a climate action vision.
Yeah, all those relate to the climate action plan and environmental action plan, and they're the only ones that are negative, and we need to turn that around.
Okay, very good. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that just kind of makes me curious as to the attendance, because I'm sure there's a lot of people who don't think that those should be red. And there's other issues. I mean, when you look at safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure, you have transit, walk transit friendly, bike. No other infrastructure at all. And we have a ton of infrastructure, but none of those are included in that. So it makes me question if that is a true representation of what our community's green, yellow, and reds really are.
So which box are you looking at? One of them that you say?
No, it was just when I looked at infrastructure, all there was transit and no cars. And then you look at environmental stewardship.
Where are you on there? I'm
looking down at
second column. I got
column.
it now. Okay.
And then fifth column, we say nothing about really water from the feed. Likewise with infrastructure on the front end, and they're some of the most significant issues we have right now.
Yeah, I think if you go back to your map of current or future, that's the map that they dreamed up in the 70s. That's what they thought it would look like. They failed, though, to look at their basic travel infrastructure. And so what you've got are actually some pockets that are somewhat isolated. They didn't develop a really adequate north-south route or east-west route.
Right. And there's no comments whatsoever on the one about a bridge.
So if
we
you
know
don't
70% of the people in town would like to see a bridge, but well, there's a lot of people who don't. But you would think it would at least be reflected in connectivity, from an infrastructure perspective. So
maybe Eunice could address how those indicators we could go back to that page 10, because I think I hear what you're saying, Counselor, that the column safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure doesn't seem to be complete. That we don't have a comprehensive list there, and I think that Eunice, if you could speak to how during that phase 1 of the process that we got to evaluating just those, because we had, like you said, like 80 of them that we originally were looking at, and so maybe we could talk more about why we only have, I don't know how many are left. 20.
So we did have a public process to ask the community kind of what are your priorities for these indicators. We had some workshops, we had a survey, an advisory committee, and that's kind of how we got to this. That's not to say, though, that we do have 80 or 90 total indicators that we could pull data from. We heard, for example, that traffic congestion is a concern from the public, and we do have a way to measure at least vehicle miles traveled, for example. We did meet also with staff internally, including our utility planners, to talk about water, sewer, infrastructure. So just because it's not on this chart doesn't mean that it can't be considered.
Cool. And just because it looks like there's big pieces missing, and so I don't know how we chose what went on that slide versus.
We would need to pull out the street section and put it in to talk about our streets and congestion. I don't quite understand.
I was just saying that we can report, we will have data on the other indicators, on the results of the other indicators. So there was 80-some plus options here.
I kind of hear what Councilor Nanke's saying, I think. Why isn't our street system, because of the congestion, And the inadequacy, I mean, we just got done dealing with Salem Heights, and clearly an inadequate arterial or whatever it was. I don't remember what its designation was, but they didn't meet it. Why isn't that on this list? I don't understand, as safe, reliable, efficient infrastructure doesn't include our basic street system, bringing it to some optimal use.
Mayor, if I could, these are just the ones the public voted on. So I think water's maybe not that exciting to vote for when you're in a public meeting. What Eunice is saying is we're going to consider all of those. So we only picked 20 and let the public pick 20 because we thought doing a report card with 92 indicators was confusing to people on phase 1 and was too much data and too difficult to explain what each indicator meant and have people digest it. So the public picked these as the ones that are the most important to them when they came to the workshops. And we thought, well, that's great. That's a good way to let people look at how we're growing right now. We have the data for all the indicators, and of course we will be looking at streets and water as we do this. But I mean, we can't look at the built environment without those elements. So that's definitely part of the project. I think what Eunice is saying is when we start doing scenarios, we will run the indicators, all of the indicators, but we'll definitely report back on these because the public said these are important. And we'll be able to say, like Councilor Anderson asked, hey, under this scenario, is red turning to green or is it at least turning to yellow? So then the council and the community can decide, hey, we're moving in the right direction. But if it's turning green somewhere, but then the street system has turned red, we will pull that data out and say, hey, you really need to look at this.
Yeah, I'm just
because
really
it might seem exciting over here, but it's causing problems over here.
I'm just concerned if you were to have a different group that show up at the thing, you would see red on congestion. I mean, it would just, yeah, I think that would be a very common reaction in parts of the community, certainly parts where the growth has occurred heavily, and they can't get from here to there.
Yes.
And I should clarify that during the workshops and all the outreach at the different community organizations going forward, we will be asking kind of the blank slate questions. What's important to you? What do you want to change and improve? These results that you're seeing are just the results that come out of a model. So these aren't voted on in terms of I think this is green or I think this is red. This is just kind of based on the data itself.
I'm just a little concerned that this somehow is phase 1 results. Sounds pretty absolute, and it's missing a key element and does not include water. Another key element. I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. Yeah.
So I think that maybe the thing that's not quite clear to us, or at least some of us, is how do you need anything from us to get to that phase where we're looking at all of those other elements? Or is that just, this is a sampling that the public decided was a priority, but you're going to be reporting on all of those regardless of what we say here tonight? All those things are going to be reported on.
Yes. All those things will be reported on. Yes.
Great. Thanks.
This is, I just tell you, this slide then becomes just troubling. It doesn't have anything, apparently doesn't have anything to do with what we're going to be ultimately, and I would hate to see this become misleading in terms of what all you're doing, and then suddenly stuff starts popping up that the public hadn't had a chance to weigh in on. I mean, there's going to be some people looking at this saying this is perfect, others looking at it saying what's missing here.
Right, and I think, and one of the...
and then it becomes staff put them in, okay?
Right, and I think one of the benefits of having a consultant team that has done a lot of this type of work is that they will be able to see some of the red flags that come out of the rest of those that maybe aren't shown up here, and we'll be able to highlight those, and we can talk about those and bring those to the public.
When will we see those? When will we see that list?
That evaluation will happen after the scenarios. With the scenarios, so we'll say these are the 4 scenarios, and this is how they perform. You know, they're generally doing better or worse than each other and than the current.
All righty. Yes, Ashley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think that the part of maybe the way that we ensure that a slide like this or a slide that discusses phase 1 of this process doesn't mislead the public in the future outreach is to maybe give a little bit more flavor to what a comprehensive plan can and cannot do for them in terms of you're trying to find indicators in which data is available, and that is how you started this process, is to say, how can we collect data? How do we have anything to justify if we're heading in the right direction or not? It's data, and in some ways there are some items in which data simply cannot be collected, or there are some items for which it's not under the purview of a comprehensive plan, which is a city government document that guides city policy. It's not under the purview of that kind of document to utilize. And so part of it may be, when you're introducing this phase 2, which I think is going to be really an exciting phase for the public to be part of, because I know after going to the phase 1 outreach meetings, everyone really wanted to get to phase 2. They were like, why are we doing this part? We want to go to the vision side. And so explaining why we did phase 1 and why it helps and lends itself to the process. I think that, so it's really just kind of crafting the introduction in a way that doesn't mislead them towards thinking they can only tunnel vision into one of these boxes.
Okay. Yeah, Josh.
So in piggybacking on that, those game pieces that you speak about that will be available in the workshop, will they be limited to the game pieces, or you know what I'm saying? If there is something like you're worried about that it's not actually had data that actually came up on this, or maybe is there a game piece for which they could say, hey, this is something that's not there.
Yes.
I just don't want them to think we are only limited to the game pieces.
Yes.
We don't have a voice beyond, we can't address an issue beyond the game pieces. That's what
Absolutely.
I'm worried about.
This is really meant to be wide open. So if people want to draw on the maps, that things they think are missing, or change things, or add trails, or they can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Tom.
Councilor Cook or Commissioner Levin had their hands up.
Are you gonna go ahead?
Well, I'll go ahead, but I don't want to. I want to get back to the. Yeah. Am I going to go ahead? Well, let me see.
Yeah.
I presume that was a rhetorical question.
To get you moving here.
Let's look at phase 1.
Taking the public's time here.
Yeah. As I understand it, and maybe I'm wrong, we had the 92 areas. The public then, by stickers and other things, indicated what their concern was, and these 20 were the top 20 out of the 92.
Yes.
Okay.
Councilor Cook.
I don't feel that I have anything to add right now. I think that Ashley summed it up very well, and I want to appreciate you for capturing the comprehensive plan. I think just because something is not listed in this plan doesn't mean that it's not taking place. There's nothing about police, there's nothing about fire. The city still does all of those things. However, how we choose to grow and develop affects everything else. It affects our water, it affects our transit. Eunice spoke about the transportation systems plan. We have these plans in place. How we implement them and how they relate to each other, I think, I'm not a planner, but from what I've listened to with Eunice and Lisa, this is how they are connected, and this is why it's important. So it is wonderful to listen and make sure that everyone is heard, but it's also wise to be mindful that just because it's not listed in this particular document is not cause for concern that it's not taking place or that it's not on our radar.
Good. Ian?
No comments at this time.
Okay, great. Any? Yes.
I think staff you probably want to be prepared, I think, for a response to those who so shortly after a very hotly debated, decided issue on the third bridge or not the third bridge, people are going to be looking for an opportunity to voice their concerns, one way or the other, both sides of the. And so I just think if I were you, I'd be like thinking, what are my talking points going to be to kind of diffuse that, or to encourage people that they do have an avenue to raise that.
And they've written it under other and voted for it.
Yeah. On a more serious note, our response is that the city has decided that issue, and therefore it's not going to be shown in any of our models. It's not an option for this project until the council tells us otherwise.
Right.
But people can continue to write it under other.
Yes.
Thank you. With respect to the modeling and the projections for growth. We have projected at a 35% increase in population, 60,000 on top of 210, 35%. Do we project out, we just completed the first greenhouse gas inventory. Being that we've already discussed kind of at length, at least for what we can see here, a lot of those indicators are red. Did we also project out what those indicators look like with the equivalent population growth and things that come along with it?
Right, so those colored boxes are a reflection of those two trends in the future, those two growth scenarios in the future, if we keep things the same, if we grow as we've been growing. The results weren't that different between the current trends, which had like 54,000 people, and the zoning build-out, which had like 93,000 people,
Okay.
largely because the policies and the goals are the same. So that is a reflection of the future scenarios.
Okay. No, that's good.
Okay.
I'll save the rest for later. Thanks.
I think it's later. Do you wanna? Okay, I guess that's it, Eunice. What next?
Public comment?
Okay, we'll go to public comment then. And what I'd ask is if you want to comment, just kind of line up up for the podium. We'll give you, right now, we'll give you 3 minutes. Watch Mr. Fernandez, he'll let you know when it's 2, and then 1.
He's a professional.
He is a professional
Thank you,
timer.
city councilors and everybody here. So I greatly appreciate your work into this, but I don't think.
What's your name?
Lou Brumbach. I'm from West Salem.
Get close to that mic if you can.
My name is Lou Brumbach. I'm from West Salem. I lived there 22 years. I've been fortunate to have a little one-bedroom house over there. And I had that paid off, so I really appreciate everything. So the scenario is that we're comparing ourselves to Corvallis, the people that have a house paid off. So the scenario is, well, how about the senior citizens here that are like on a set income that only make like $1,200 a month? And if we bring all these other people in here and all the rents go up, their rent's going to go up, like Portland. So are these people that are like on a set income, like $1,200 a month, and all of a sudden we get 60,000 more people here, so their landlord's going to jump their rent up. And so the scenario is about people who own a house, but how about people who are renting a house that are like on a Social Security income? Are we addressing our senior citizens? We're in a place where now the millennials, the senior citizens are getting older. So if the people, then what are these people going to do? I mean, if they only make $1,200 a month on Social Security, and their rent goes up from, like, let's say, $700 a month to $1,200 a month, are we just going to send these people out on the street? Or I don't get the scenario on that one. So it just compares. You guys are saying people that own a house, so you're not really including people that rent. And so now, when you compare this to like the scale, well, sorry, I'll just talk like this. So if you compare the scale that people like have a house in Corvallis, and they own a house, and then you think, and people in Salem, then are we just going to leave our seniors that live on the streets? I mean, I don't see where you guys, there's like a lot of homeless up there already. I mean, are we just going to send the people that are homeless on the streets? Are they getting housing through the state or federal? So I don't think that addresses you bring more people in, the rents are going to go up. So the scenario is on people who are buying a house. So we need more like a scenario that people that rent. So this way, and so the other scenario is we need an infrastructure here. I mean, the road systems are terrible. I live in West Salem. I go up Glen Creek. It's terrible. Traffic's horrendous. We just bring all more people in. We don't have. This isn't Phoenix, Arizona, where they have roads and systems in place. We're gonna bring all these people in. There's no roads. It's completely overpopulated as it is, and you guys want to bring more and more people. I ride my bike and look at it. There's homeless litter, shopping carts everywhere. I mean, I don't think you guys are in a different world from everybody else. You gotta ride your bike around and look, shopping carts, homeless everywhere. Let's address the core issues of this town. We can't bring a whole bunch more. We want to turn it into Portland or Seattle? There'll be homeless on every street and shopping cart. I just don't. I think you guys are looking for people with college educations, high earner money. You're not really looking for the poor people in developing plans to help the homeless.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Phil Carver, and I represent 350 Salem. And the group has not had a chance to review my remarks because I made them up during the meeting. But I hope they don't go too far from the principles of the group. We really appreciate the city engaging in this comprehensive plan update. I think it's a critical endeavor, and I think it's been done well. And we appreciated the public workshops, and I did have a question, Eunice. Is there a technical advisory committee for the comprehensive plan? Is that we'd appreciate being noticed about the meetings of that, because we have quite a few people on our group that have technical expertise, and we want to find out about those. We found out about all the public meetings, but we'd appreciate knowing about that, and I can give you my phone number or email. One of the areas, the indicators was environmentally sensitive areas, and we didn't get into this in the last part of the planning process, but runoff is going to get worse with heavier storms with climate change, and that's going to increase flooding. Most of the flooding is on the creeks, like Mill Creek and those, and the development, both the type of development and the rezoning, the rules, the development rules about what the swales and other features to absorb the runoff is an important feature, but also the type of dwellings and where they're located matter. So we hope that some indicators can be indicate what the effect of flooding is of the various different scenarios. Maybe that can be back of the envelope. I have some expertise in that. My graduate work was in water, but I don't know how to do a rainfall runoff model. I didn't do that. That indicator is interesting to us. There was some discussion about what the indicators that were red. Those were, as Eunice tried to explain, that those are based on the city's current goals, or goals that have been promulgated elsewhere. So, like the state goals. And so those are not the staff's judgment about meeting those. This is what the scenario does, and this is whether it whether the indicator gets better or not, like the amount of bicycle use and so on like that. And so, just as an overview of this process, this is about zoning, and then after we get the zoning and other things like that done, then this will feed into the transportation plan. And the transportation plan then will have to address the needs based on the location of work and housing and shopping and all those things. That's what a trip generation model does.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Good evening. My name is Suzanne Colt, and I live in West Salem. And those of you who know me know that I've been involved with city planning issues for going on 30 years. And I'm very glad that you're finally doing this visioning, and I think it's very, very helpful in lots of ways, although the average citizen hasn't a clue what you're talking about when you're talking about creating a comprehensive plan. And so I think you're going to have a big hurdle between what you say you're envisioning and then what actually happens. But I wanted to talk a little bit about implementation of a comprehensive plan. We all know that the city only has a little bit of control over some aspects where they have funding to do infrastructure or other kinds of projects. But the vast majority of the implementation of the comprehensive plan comes from private citizens, landowners, developers, and so forth. And unless we either get them all on board to have a shared vision that's going to last us for 20 years, we're going to have to do it through some other mechanisms. And I suggest that those mechanisms are your planning commission and your planning staff and your public works people who are approving these private individuals' permits and design plans. And until you tackle some of the quote-unquote flexibility in the comprehensive planning implementation, I think that we're going to be where we were 30 years ago, where we had a plan, and every single week or every 2 weeks there was a application for a comprehensive plan change. So if you really want to see these things happen, I think you have to address the processes for the decision making for those applications. And as long as you have vagaries in your comp plan, like vicinity that's not defined, character of a neighborhood that's not defined, and you have loopholes such as 20% variance from the standard as being permissible, or that you don't tighten up your comp plan change criteria, what's going to happen is you're going to have a beautiful comprehensive plan. You're going to pass it, and then the next week the Planning Commission is going to get an application for changing that comprehensive plan, and incrementally all the visioning goes out the window. So we really need to think about how are we going to implement this comprehensive plan so we get to where we need to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Jim Shepke, and I live in Ward 2, and I'm a strong member of 350 Salem. And in 350 Salem, we've stopped talking about climate change. We've even stopped talking about a climate crisis that's going to happen in the future. We talk about a climate emergency that is happening now. On July 4th, it was 90 degrees in Anchorage, Alaska. On July 25th, it was 109 degrees in Paris, France. July was the hottest month ever after 140 years of keeping records. So for me, this is the lens that this Our Salem process has to look through, and everything has to do something about climate change. There could be no higher priority for Salem than to become a carbon neutral city within a few decades. If we are able to do this, we will be doing our part to make the earth habitable for future generations. Business as usual is not an option when it comes to revising the Salem Comprehensive Plan. Radical change is needed to the way we plan for the future if we are going to have a future. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Meg Hummin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Louder?
Yeah.
My name is Meg Hummin. I'm a relatively recent resident of Salem. I came here a little less than 2 years ago. I have a daughter who is here. That's why I'm here. Besides, it's a beautiful place to live. She goes everywhere by bicycle, and I pretty much do also. So I get to see all these things that we've been talking about that you see when you go slowly on a bicycle around town. I came to the visioning sessions last spring or whenever they were that formed the basis of your report. And I just have a small editorial suggestion and then a bigger question. If you change that slide with the 20 boxes to phase 1 result or phase 1 report rather than result, you'll kind of calm people a little bit. And make it clear that this is the result of phase 1 of the public input. But I'd be interested to know what % of the effort that's going into this is based on this public input. Because if that's the case, I'm very uneasy. But I hope there's a parallel process with experts who will, of course, include the water and all of these other things. If we were going to build a building, a public building, sure, it's appropriate to find out what colors people find soothing and whether they want big windows, but you wouldn't ask them to design the building and then build it and expect it to stand up. The public, me, I'm not able to think of all the things, and I was very uneasy at that visioning process because of the things that weren't stated, and many of which have come up here. So I'm glad we're doing this. I'd like to second everything that was said by the previous speaker. I think climate change is our number 1, 2, 3, 4. We're in a crisis. We don't have very long to fix it. We may not be able to fix it. So everything we do in this plan needs to be through that funnel. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone?
We have one more, I think.
Yeah. Ah, okay.
Good evening. My name is Meg Rao. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the 350 Salem chapter. Sorry. There we go. My name is Meg Rao. I live in Ward 1, and I'm one of the co-coordinators of 350 Salem, Oregon's chapter. And I just want to make a really short point and remind us back to, I think, Eunice's first or second slide, where she showed us that big long list of everything that's involved in the comprehensive plan, and then she took everything away except those top 2, and the top 2 are the essentially the policy statement and document, and then the map. So without climate change and a commitment to addressing climate change in that larger policy document, those smaller plans that flow out of the policy document don't have a foundation. They don't have a direction out of the overall plan. So that makes it much more difficult, if not impossible, in some situations for that transportation plan to effectively account for and address what we're doing on greenhouse gas emissions. The same for the other plans, and water and runoff, as Phil mentioned earlier, is an important part of that as well. So I just encourage you to keep that in mind as you move forward on those larger documents, that you're setting the stage for all the rest of those plans that come down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard, you want to?
Gonna do individual eye contact with you?
I'm working with Richard right now. I'm just trying to. You had a really good email you sent us. You want to talk at all about that a little bit? Okay. There we go. See?
we can hit 7 o'clock, baby.
I could turn this meeting into an hour at least.
I'm Richard Reed. I live on Bluff Avenue, and the email the mayor's referring to is that, well, one of the key things we're going to be doing with the comprehensive plan is that it all has a price tag. So I was hoping to see more of that. You know, I guess as we get into outreach, that'll be a question will be more obvious to come up. But I was suggesting to the mayor that there might be an alternative to, this may seem off topic, but there's an alternative, I think, to when we're making up the budget shortfall this time. There's an alternative to taxing workers here in the community. And I was just suggesting just a broader category of tax reform, that as we're looking at this comprehensive plan, some of the data we can find is about whether or not a tax parcel is repaying the costs of services to that parcel. And, you know, so we need to identify the development that we're doing now that's returning the tax revenue that we want. Eugene, I know all cities are different, but Eugene did this last year. They did an acre-to-acre analysis of the tax revenue per acre in town. And again, they were looking for tax reform. Some parcels, some acres were paying more than their share, I guess I'll put it that way, and some paying less. So again, what they're saying, their staff down there, of course, is saying that a lot of development is driven by economics and by the efficiency of that economics to the community. So it's just another dimension of it that I'm hoping as we get into it, we'll be doing, you know, looking at more.
Very good.
Mike Erdman with the Home Builders Association. Wasn't planning on speaking, but I think I have to touch on the issue of housing affordability. And I know that when we were looking at at kind of the chart of the various areas, kind of analyzing whether they're green or yellow or red, we've got housing affordability listed as yellow, meaning we're not quite sure, which direction we're going. And I would argue to you that I think it's very clear that that should be red. When you look at Salem's affordability, not its prices, but its affordability, measuring, how affordable are homes, comparing our prices to our incomes in town compared to other metro areas around the country. As of, I think, early this summer, we ranked 185th out of 239 metro areas in the country. So it's the bottom, basically bottom 20%. And if you go back and you look, I think that 2013, I was just looking it up on my laptop there. Just 6 years ago, we were 120th of 239. And so we have slid, from 120th to 185th in 6 years. And so I would encourage you to just keep your eye on that, because there's a lot of opportunities here with this process and a lot of good things that can happen. But there's also a lot of decisions that you'll make that are going to affect housing affordability. And certainly there are pulls and pushes, and there are things that are good for the community in many areas that may affect housing affordability. I would just encourage you to keep your eye on that. Realize that many of the decisions you will make will affect the ability of folks to afford housing in Salem, whether that's a rental or a purchase. So that is just my encouragement to you.
Mike, one of the things I remember from the last comprehensive plan back in the 70s was the decision really to put it into the hills, essentially of South Salem and West Salem, and that the result of that seems to have been a higher housing cost in those particular areas. Are you saying then that there is information available that would help us better understand location and cost of building? Or I'm not sure.
Yeah, and certainly we can help you with that. And it's absolutely the case, Mr. Mayor, when you look at the cost of developing in the hills is significantly more expensive than developing on flatter areas of town. And that's why for the most part, the flat areas of town have been built out, because that's where we've been able to do more affordable housing over the last few decades. But if you look at where our available land is inside the UGB, for the most part, it's all in South and West Salem. And that, of course, is generally hilly. It costs a lot more to do that. And by default, it forces up the price of what it costs to develop and build. And so, again, that's one of those trade-offs that we make. We may say we want to protect farmland. We have to recognize, of course, what that means for housing prices. It's a good example, I think, and you bring it up, the kinds of questions that we have to ask ourselves.
So, okay. I think I'm following it. So as we look at the affordability factor, I recall that I think being in the results was sort of affordable housing. What are we watching for? Because I thought the gentleman who talked about affordability has a very good point, that should be one of our factors at least, and it appears that it will be in the results we saw.
Sure.
What are the kinds of factors we're watching for?
Sure. So as an example, one of the red squares that you had was tree canopy. And so obviously I would expect that may lend to a discussion as to what are we doing with tree preservation as a part of the development process. And so if we're going to look at more significant tree preservation, which I understand there's a lot of good environmental benefits that come with that, we have to recognize that when we do that, it's generally going to make development significantly more expensive and more difficult to do, because we're in the hills. And so when somebody comes in and develops, you have to do intersections, for example, that are flat to meet ADA requirements. And to do that, you have to do a lot of excavation on that site to get those streets flat and to get those intersections flat. Well, you can't do that. You can't do that mass excavation and preserve significant amounts of trees. So it's just an example of that kind of trade-off. That if you're looking at tree canopy, that can affect housing affordability.
Okay. Yes.
Can I ask a question of Lisa? Or Eunice? Both of you, maybe. The implementation plan portion of the comprehensive plan that Eunice had brought up as a part of the later part of this stage that we're in now, how much is that implementation plan discuss city budgeting priorities, if at all?
I don't think we envision that it will be related to the budget. It'll be about how do we implement the goals, i.e. what zones do we need to change? What do we need to change about our development code, our TSP, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to confirm.
Thank you.
Michael, you are? Come on. Tree canopy, come on, give us a shot. I just want to make sure everyone feels real comfortable that you're more than welcome to come up and share your thoughts on this. It's really helpful, actually, because there's stuff you don't think of or that you hear presented differently. I think a good example is the question of housing costs. Buying one's a whole different thing than renting one, and renting one on a fixed income and what that means to people. I really appreciate you bringing that up. But if there's anything else that we're missing, it'd be really, anything? There we go. No, we'll take off. Plus, I can't imagine being home by 7:30. It just doesn't fit.
I'm Michael Slater. I'm a 16-year resident now of Salem. I'm also the land use chair of the Fairwright Neighborhood organization. So just a couple perspectives from the Fairwright Neighborhood Association, not about tree canopies. That's a later discussion. I think from the perspective of the Fairwright Neighborhood community, which is a fairly established residential community, I think we have a couple concerns. Our primary concern is actually just code enforcement. I think our neighborhood is much more interested in long-term code enforcement and the ability to respond to concerns in the neighborhood than some of the more esoteric questions about what the future growth is, just because it is such a stable community. And to get back to what Councilor Anderson said, kind of the thing that we are keeping our eye on is the zoning issues related to converting houses to duplexes, et cetera. We don't have a lot of vacant land, so the concern that we have coming down the pike is as land prices go up, people will be selling their single-family, one-story home, and they'll be converting it to duplexes, triplexes, quads, and that's going to have a significant impact on the neighborhood. Now, that may be ultimately a good thing for all of us in the community, but how it's implemented is something that we are very concerned about. We've seen examples in Seattle and other places where you have a giant modern box next to a single-family 1958 home, and that creates, I think, some problems in continuity in the neighborhood and the feel. So I know that's a little different about what we're talking about today, but from an established, kind of stable, small community perspective, I think that's the things that we're looking at right now.
Well, as we're looking at visioning then, Michael, we are looking, because of state law now, on higher densities in some of these more stable neighborhoods. What would be the kinds of things, as we're looking at that, in the comprehensive plan, that we would begin to incorporate it to make neighborhoods both stable, livable, functioning, with the services that are needed as we start poking more people into. We're seeing what's happening downtown. There's an expansion of services, but it's a kind of different. I'm just thinking of my neighborhood up in Inglewood. What should I be watching for? What should I be asking for as we vision these density changes?
Well, this is certainly beyond my expertise, which now is tree
mine
canopy.
too, obviously.
But I think for us, one of the concerns is simply the design standards, so that it feels like we have some integrity in the neighborhood and that it feels like a cohesive neighborhood as opposed to a jigsaw puzzle style in design. So I'd be very interested in the evolution of kind of design standards and facade standards in the community. It's one thing to take down a ranch house and replace it with a two-story ranch house with 4 doors, as opposed to a giant new modern building. That's a very different feel.
Yeah.
And I think again for the Fairwright neighborhood, we've missed out on a lot of the sidewalk construction, which means that walking and bicycling especially is an issue for us. We're actually fairly close to the downtown, and it would be great to have a much better walk-bike infrastructure, and that of course will reduce the traffic and the need for cars. So as we get denser and there's less parking, the better our kind of foot, scooter, whatever transit system is, the much better it is for us and the more kind of people we're able to accommodate in that neighborhood.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for coming up and speaking, Michael. I just wanted to say these are exactly the kind of questions and concerns that I think this our Salem Comprehensive Plan REAMP was designed to address, because the issue of how we grow, and does it have to be in a way that one side's a winner and one side's not, someone's upset, someone's not? Or can it be done in a way that where we create buy-in, like we're talking about, where we improve livability, where we have standards where we know we're going to change.
Mhm.
Living things change. That's what happens. So how can we do that in a way that's palatable and that it is in a way that we want to go as a community? So, I mean, Fayrite, as one of the oldest neighborhood associations that just celebrated their anniversary this year, I think they're doing a great job, and I want to say this is exactly in line with what's happening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope we will hear more. I hope as the neighborhoods talk, because I've followed enough neighborhood plans, they tend to come with a lot of visioning in them, and I hope they will become a real part of this visioning process, that NEN, NESCA, Fayrite, whoever has these plans ready to go, that they give that kind of vision, I think, of what a strong neighborhood would look like. Particularly a strong neighborhood as density increases really has me kind of concerned as to how it gets serviced. Yeah, Josh?
When we had one of the amendments to the UDC, we had to do the issue of accessory buildings and things like that. That
Thanks,
was to be able to provide a little bit more affordable housing, like a mother-in-law cottage in the back and things such as that. So, but that does not mean that when we're doing this, we're going to change the way the neighborhood looks. However, when you, in fact, we just had something that came before us, and they wanted us to flip around parking, and I said, no, that's going to change the character of this historic neighborhood. But when you also talk about multifamily housing and affordability, we're talking more apartment buildings. And not a lot of people are going to like that in their neighborhood, because they're saying, oh, we're, single family, we like the open fields and things like that. But the reason that Senate Bill 100 created the urban growth boundary is to infill. And if we're in a crisis, a red crisis for affordability, it's more apartment houses. The more the market has, the less that landlord, he's got to go with the market. The more you have, the less he's going to be able to. In other words, with scarcity comes higher rents. The more you have of apartment buildings, the less they're going to be able to raise that rent. So, but the current neighborhoods just do not want them in their backyards. And so it's a balancing act between affordability and character and things such as that. And not everybody, and sometimes it might not always be a win-win. We try to do a win-win, but sometimes it's going to be a win and maybe half a loser or something like this, But I just want to make that point. It's not always easy when you're balancing all these needs and neighborhood character.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Nadine Lesheminat, and I just have 3 very quick points. One is, I know that some of the folks from 350 talked about climate change and how it's already here. And so I'm just hoping that our plan can address things that we need in terms of adaptability. What are we planning as far as floods? I mean, we saw major flooding last year. What are we planning in terms of heat, wildfire smoke, and drought? And I think we already have places where people can go get warm in the winter, but we want to make sure that we have places where people can get cool in the summer, besides the little fountain at Riverfront Park. I also wanted to mention, when I drive around the city, I notice that the places where I see the most walkers, it's the places where people have a lower income level, those are the places often without sidewalks. And it's really disturbing to see the people that most need sidewalks often don't have them, and so I hope that that can be addressed. And last, I wanted to really thank you, all of you, for everything you do. I know that when you come to these meetings and unveil plans, that sometimes it feels like there's this barrage of criticism, And I think all of us here are very appreciative of all the time that you put in. We know that you're dedicated. I can hear your caring of the city and your concern for us as citizens. And I appreciate that you have forums like this where you invite us to come and give our comments. And I really appreciate all the long hours that you all put in. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura Doherty. I live in Ward 2, and I'm also a member of 350, and I know you all probably think I have a one-track mind because we come here, we talk about climate change. But I also care deeply about affordable housing. I mean, I'm a renter, and I'm coming close to being priced out of Salem, and I don't want that to happen. And I think when we look at the issues of housing and we look at density and climate change, they work together because the more people are concentrated in the more different kinds of building and amenities, shopping and stores, coffee shops are clustered together, then we have less traffic, and there's actually more, it's more enjoyable, it's more vibrant. And when you think about neighborhood character, I mean, I've lived in a lot of different cities, and interesting places have layers of history. You know, you see different moments of history, moments of style, moments of cultural impacts and things like that. The neighborhoods aren't monolithic. There are differences among, you know, block to block or even within the same block. And this makes for a living, vibrant, you know, entity in a city. And a city is not a museum piece. It's a living, evolving entity. Anyway, that's my thought.
Do you, Lori, I'm just curious, as you were talking, it made me think, it seems like we're getting really rapidly housing downtown, and I'm just wondering if part of the reason that isn't happening is if you get a place downtown, you get the kind of coffee shop, restaurant, movies, all the other stuff, barbers, all of it. Downtown, it's there, it exists, and I'm still fascinated by how we get the density around these other nodes of development in the community where we have this kind of focus going on. And I'm just, it's trying to figure out, because everyone you ask says, I'd like to have my neighborhood have, and the list always seems to begin, and which amazes me because I don't do it anymore, but a dry cleaner, a barber shop. I'm still using a barber shop downtown, but you know, you can kind of run through the list and it's a coffee shop and it's a burger place or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
that kind of a sandwich shop.
Yeah.
How do we get that, do you think? How do we?
I don't know. I think part of it has to do with zoning. Part of it has to do with getting kind of momentum behind it. I don't know, getting people.
Do you think the
thinking about
density
it.
will drive it if we
I
have more
think density will drive some of that. I mean,
Yeah.
I live in the area between Mission and State, and they're
Yeah.
talking about redoing the State Street corridor, you know, and things like that. And I know it caused controversy in some ways, but the neighborhood I live in there, I mean, that could use more like quad, you know, fourplexes. There are a few things like that. I live in a duplex. There could be more of those things, and I guess I don't have this obsession with neighborhood character. I mean, I think there are historic places that need to be preserved. There are things that we need to cherish and you know, maintain as part of our history. But like I said, neighborhoods are living, evolving places, and yeah, I think we need to encourage that kind of thinking among residents and among businesses as where they locate, and among developers as to how they see their role within the city.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I can say.
Okay, great. Thank you, Laurie. Yeah, Corey. Casey, sorry.
It's okay. Thank you, Mayor. Lori made me think of something that I guess was in the back of my mind all this time, and it's the interconnectedness of climate to housing affordability and everything else with respect to the Salem Planning Commission and our roles with the comprehensive plan. And it makes me wonder if there's any thought around modeling going forward with our Salem process, the bylaws or the code for the planning commission around what some of the other cities, as Mike mentioned, every city is different, but what some of the other cities in Oregon are already doing and have done with their planning commissions. Portland's planning commission, for example, is called the Portland Planning and Sustainability Commission, and it's written into the bylaws of the commission what the commission's role is with respect to the climate action plan and everything else, so that they have the structure in place and they have the mandate in place for the strategic plan for the future as we continue to recognize the interconnectedness of zoning and climate and affordability and everything that we see in the Planning Commission and how that affects everything else. And so I wonder if staff it could take a look at I think Eugene has it as well, written into their bylaws for their Planning Commission, something that we may want to consider modeling for ours.
Okay. So essentially, it's when you look at the kind of results we looked at, you're sort of looking at how do you use an existing structure to begin to address tree canopy and housing, and you're trying to pull those into, yeah, right. It's interesting.
And we do have, Planning Commission does have some impact, especially with the trees and
Yeah.
you know how much can be taken out and how much of the significant trees can be removed. So we do touch some of those climate change issues, but not comprehensively.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is what I think you're trying to
Yeah. Okay. Just making sure I don't miss anybody. Okay. Anything else anyone want to share? Any thoughts on visioning?
Ready to share a wave goodbye?
Okay.
We did just want to say to the counselors and commissioners, if you want more of these handouts, Eunice has them. If you have events you want to take them to, and other folks, and we'll be giving them out from now until up to the event. And if you have any organizations you think we should go talk to that you didn't hear Eunice mention today, or that you want to make sure that we do, please feel free to let us know, because we want to get to everybody that should be involved.
Great. Well, thank you. Then we're adjourned.
Lovely sitting next to you.
Same here.